First You Think is a not-for-profit ministry of the First Unitarian Church of Des Moines. Support us at ucdsm.org today.
Thank you for allowing United Methodist to invade your service here this morning. Chase, where are you? Excellent job on the Rachmaninoff. I've played that piece. It's a challenge. Bruce and I were reminiscing this morning that the one person who hated to play that piece was Sergei Rachmaninoff because he got asked to play it everywhere he went. It's a really challenging piece. You did a nice job. Bruce has always been my piano hero. So I sang harmony on the first hymn, the first two verses, but I figured you'd be bruising it up on line 3. So I switched to melody. I did. Barb, thank you for the invitation for being here today. When Barb and I read at Iris, we're in separate studios, facing each other, but separated by a pane of glass. And so it's always, we would take turns reading. I'd read a story, she'd read a story, I'd read a story. Always fun to watch Barb's face when she's reading a story about Donald Trump, because it would never come through in her voice, right? It's a good thing it's not television, but, doing this. And then I have to make it through my story without laughing. I have a confession to make this morning. And just saying the word confession here in church sends chills down my spine because I grew up Catholic. And I imagine some of you did too. Anybody else here? As a young boy of 8 or 9 in Catholic school, I once so feared going into the confessional to admit to the priest what I had done that I managed to give myself a stomach ache. So I got sent to the school nurse, and my mom came and picked me up and took me home so I didn't have to go to confession. True story. The sin I avoided confessing was probably because I'd said a hell or a damn on the playground, or I had unclean thoughts I didn't understand about the 3rd grade girl in her little Catholic school uniform sitting next to me. The confession that I have today is that I spent 43 years in journalism convincing people to watch and read the news. And now many of my friends ask me how they can avoid watching so much of it. I believe paying attention matters, but I've been around long enough to know that paying too much attention to the news can create its own kind of suffering. Mary Oliver's The Summer Day, which Barb just read, focuses us not on escaping reality. It's about paying careful attention to a different reality. The poem asks us what deserves our attention. She does not ask us to ignore the world. She asks us to notice a grasshopper. Well, I spent a lifetime not only asking viewers to pay attention, but in deciding what to ask you to pay attention to. Each and every day, our news team would meet in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, talk over what's happening today, locally and around the world, and then make decisions about what was most important for us to focus on. Hi, Steve. We understood that everyone is busy, busier than ever. Your time is precious. As a reporter and as a news manager, I always wanted to make sure that I never wasted your time. When I was a reporter, I would get an assignment in the morning. Then I would spend all day gathering facts, interviews, expert analysis, learning as much as I could about whatever topic I was covering that day. Then would come the challenging part. I'd spent 6 hours learning as much as possible. Now, how am I going to boil that down for TV news to a minute and a half or 2 minutes? To boil it down to information that, in my opinion alone, you would find most interesting, most informative, most useful in your lives. There's no right or wrong in that decision-making process. Each reporter does his or her level best to decide what to leave in and, perhaps more important, what to leave out. I always tried to respect the audience, respect their intelligence, respect their time. You sort of make the egotistical decision that if I found this interesting and informative, perhaps our viewers would as well. I'd like to think that I nailed it more times than not. I'm sure there were times when I failed. Now think about this. When I started out as a reporter in the 1970s, it was a much simpler time. KCCI in those days had a 15-minute newscast at noon, a half hour at 6, and a half hour at 10. That was it. An hour and 15 minutes of news all day long. Now, KCCI has news from 4:30 in the morning to 7, a half hour at noon, an hour at 4, a half hour at 5, half hour at 6, an hour at 9 on KDSM, and another half hour at 10 on KCCI. Now, 6.5 hours a day. And I'm mostly at fault for all of that because I oversaw all of that expansion. Back then, the Des Moines Register landed on your front porch, or in our case, in the bushes or on the roof. You got up, you read through the newspaper in 15 or 20 minutes, and then you went off to school or work. And at KCCI, we knew in those days that after you'd worked all day, you came home with an appetite for news. And we would try to satisfy that at 6. Then after your evening activities, dinner, activities with the kids, whatever, you'd come back at 10 o'clock just to make sure the world was safe for you to go to bed. Now contrast that all with today. News, by definition, is bad. Accidents, fires, plane crashes, wars, crime. That's what journalism is designed to detect. Nobody wants to go to the airport and watch all the airplanes land safely. That's not very compelling. Decades ago, though, we were all exposed to that for 15 to 20 minutes a day in the morning and then maybe a half hour in the evening. But the rest of the time, you were leading your normal lives. You were teaching or selling, building things, raising a family, real life, normal stuff. Then you'd get an update near the end of the day, and then that was it. Today, you cannot avoid the news. The last thing that most people want when they get home at the end of a long workday is to turn on the news, because it's on our desktop computer all day long. We carry it around in our pocket. It's constantly dinging with the latest breaking news. It can be overwhelming. Russian drones raining down on Kyiv. The Strait of Hormuz is closed again, driving up gas prices. What terrible thing has the leader of the free world done or said now? Will he steal the midterms? Which of his enemies in the Justice Department is he going after now? When you woke up this morning, came the news that Senator Lindsey Graham had passed away. Our nervous systems evolved to respond to immediate threats, not endless reports of distant ones. So we're all asking the same questions that Mary Oliver asks in A Summer Day. What is urgent? What is true? What is worthy of my attention? Being informed today can feel overwhelming and depressing. We all know many people who have simply unplugged and walked away because they can't handle it anymore. While I understand that, I also know that there's a difference between monitoring the news and doom scrolling, between civic responsibility and compulsive consumption. It's incumbent on all of us to be well-informed. Democracy demands a well-informed citizenry. But the facts are disturbing about the number of Americans who simply are no longer paying attention. I wrote a column in April about the latest research showing that Americans who say they pay close attention to local news has fallen from, in 2016, it was at 37%, which is not great, to now a mere 21% at the end of last year, from 37% to 21% who say they pay close attention to local news. This study is by Pew Research, and it shows that fewer than 1 in 4 Americans are closely following what's happening in their communities. Now, that raises an obvious question in your mind. How are people making informed decisions about local elections, public spending, or the leaders who shape their daily lives? When Pew asked Americans where they prefer to get their news, television comes out on top, with 34% saying that's their preferred source when they want to know what's going on. And that's not so great. That's a drop from 41% back in 2018. And Americans are definitely not happy about the decline in quality of their local newspapers, their local print newspapers. Only 8% say they prefer a print newspaper. At this point, I usually ask for a show of hands. Who's still getting a print edition of the Des Moines Register? I would ask you why. Because it's expensive and it's badly out of date, and we can talk about that maybe after the service about why that's happening. Newspapers have largely given up on the print edition due to the early deadlines that they have that make the product that lands on your front porch outdated by the time it gets there. We've all learned about the financial struggles journalism faces with ad revenue splitting off to the internet, the closing of those brick and mortar stores which used to provide so much advertising for the Register and for KCCI. Dall's doesn't exist. Sears is gone. Yonkers is gone. And of course, that meant journalism jobs had to be slashed. According to a different Pew Research study, Newspaper newsroom jobs were cut in half between 2008 and 2020, from 71,000 down to 31,000, and it's only gone down since 2020. Another study showed that as recently as 2002, there were an average of 40 local journalists for every 100,000 Americans. 40 journalists for 100,000 Americans. Any guesses what that number is down to today? 8.2 local journalists per 100,000 Americans. There are some 3,000 counties in America, and a third of them, 1,000, have fewer than one journalist. So that's living in a news desert, and it's dangerous. But the same Pew research shows a surprising disconnect by Americans, 57% of whom think that their local news outlets are doing well or somewhat well financially. Breaking news, they are not. About 40% recognize that the industry is struggling, but that still leaves most people unaware of how fragile journalism has become. And that misunderstanding shows up in behavior. A staggering 88% of Americans say they haven't paid anything for local news in the past year. And this is a key point I hope you'll take away. I've thrown a few numbers at you, but remember this one. 88% of Americans haven't paid anything for local news in the past year. When asked why, about half of them said it's because they can find news somewhere else for free. You know what that means? Probably Facebook. What could possibly go wrong? A third of those folks say they simply aren't interested enough to pay for it. And about 10% say it's too expensive. So we have a conundrum. Some Americans are so overwhelmed that they're going into a defensive crouch and largely ignoring what's happening in the world around them and in their local communities. While others of us consume so much and are so concerned about events going on that we can't seem to tear ourselves away, causing unhealthy amounts of anxiety. One pendulum has swung this way, the other one has swung this way. Let me suggest that it would be better to try to swing both of those back toward the middle. For those who are ignoring the news, I'd say pay closer attention. Part of the strategy that many politicians employ today is to so thoroughly disgust us that we turn away, we avert our eyes. And what does that do? That gives politicians free rein to do what they want because we're not watching. I would also advise those avoiders to invest a little bit more of their attention, precious resource, but also their money into news operations that they trust. The biggest expense for all newsrooms is salary for reporters and producers and photographers and editors. We need those folks out on the street, knocking on doors, asking questions, being pesky, generating original content. Because once strong journalism organizations are gone, they're just not coming back. You may not need them every hour of every day, but during a crisis, you want those reporters there. And once they're gone, they are gone. Now for the other side of the pendulum, those of us who spend way too much of our attention consuming news. Here's a few pieces of advice to stay informed, not overwhelmed. Try to limit your news consumption. Check in 2 or 3 times a day. Otherwise, go live your life. Sometimes stepping away from the news isn't avoidance. I like to think of it as maintenance. We replenish so we can come back, not beaten down, but mentally balanced. In other words, live to fight another day. Find a news source or two that you trust and rely on them. Do not depend on social media to scan the headlines and throw the scariest ones at you while you scroll through. They're designed to get you to engage in some way, to click, to share, to react. It's called clickbait. Don't do it. Number 3, avoid speculative stories. Stories that say what might happen or could happen usually serve only to raise my level of anxiety. Many opinion pieces use this speculative model. During times like this, I want to know what has happened or what will happen. I've got enough to worry about with wondering what might happen. Lastly, this is 4th of 5. Avoid any story. This is my trick. Avoid any story with a question in the headline. I went searching for them over the past week, and here are some headlines that came out. Is this liberalism's last stand? Did immigration drive up housing prices? Is China the true winner of the war in Ukraine? And this favorite from the Washington Post, although it was a couple of months ago, with Trump, will we see World War III? Well, there's nothing about that story that calms my nerves. Right now, I want speculation. I don't want speculation. I want facts as succinctly as possible. And then the last tip, get out in nature. Take a walk in the woods, breathe in some fresh air, listen to the sounds of nature, feel the breeze on your skin. It's no guarantee that everything's going to be okay, but it sure does help bring perspective. There's more to life than our political fears. Nature has rhythms. Summer follows spring, day follows night. Grasshoppers wash their faces, raise their arms, and fly away. Humans should have rhythms too. One of our rhythms should be looking away from the events of the day. Rest. Stare at the sky. Even God rested on the Sabbath. So remember, your attention is a precious resource. Don't avoid the news, but don't allow yourself to be overwhelmed. Think of it this way. Awareness leads to action. Anxiety leads to paralysis. Mary Oliver asks, what else should I have done? Well, try these 3 things. Learn one important thing about the world every single day. Every day, do one concrete thing that helps. And third, notice one beautiful thing. My wife, Laura, far wiser than I, lives by the mantra that no one can do everything, but everyone can do something to help make this a better place to live. So Mary Oliver and Barb asked, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? One thing we can all do is carefully choose what receives our attention.